welcome to Cross Point. I'm so glad you guys are out with us in the sun today. I'm praying for a breeze, something, there it is, right on time. We'll pray that keeps continuing throughout the day. Hey, thank you for being here. Thank you for coming out on such an awesome, beautiful day. Colton's got some great songs for us today. Pastor Jason has an amazing message for us today. But before we get to that, just a few things to get to. Hey, we're out here today, but we will not be here next Sunday. Next weekend, our service is gonna look a little bit different. We're gonna be meeting this Saturday evening around 7 o'clock at Little River Church. Not in the church, there's a pavilion out back. We're gonna be meeting there. So there's a wood line to protect us. There's some shade, and there's some concrete there. So still feel free to bring the chairs, whatever you need, but just go ahead and plan. We will not be here next Sunday morning. We will be at Little River Church. They've allowed us to use their picnic area, which is a little bit covered, at 7 o'clock Saturday evening. Thank you for your continued support here at Cross Point Church and supporting the ministry and supporting God's kingdom. Whether you're giving online at istapoint.com or whether you're giving through our giving app, we thank you for the support that you gave and continue to give. Our kids just got back from camp, and some of those kids would not have had the opportunity to hear God's word had it not been for your continued giving on the app and at istapoint.com. So we thank you for that. One other thing, if you want to follow along today, feel free. We're still using the YouVersion app. Pastor Jason's outline is completely there. Everything, if you go to the YouVersion app, whether you have an iPhone or a Droid, if you just look in the events section or the locations, you should be able to find Cross Point Church there. And the complete outline for today's message is completely outlined there. Thank you for being here.
Hey, let me introduce Dan real quick. Dan's over here. Dan is, this is Dan Sams. Dan is a friend of, I think your wife went to school with Kate?
Yeah,
is that right?
I went to school with Kate too.
Oh, okay. All right. So they went to school with Kate. And then, of course, Roger's families and Sam's family have been friends for all these years now. I don't know, 20 years probably, something like that. Yeah. So Dan's up in Cleveland area, right? And pastors a church up there, actually has a multitude of churches. And we'll talk about some of that stuff later on down the road one day. But and then he has some other businesses that he works on. And so he partnered with us probably close to a year ago now. He renovated our website for us, and he's maintaining that, and then working on some other stuff. He's done a lot of writing for us and put my name on it, which I'm extremely grateful for. That I didn't have to write any of that stuff, and he kind of just gave us credit as we did as a church. And but we've been using that in the community, and actually when we first launched, we got a lot of response, a lot of communication interaction. So it's just going to go get better from there. And so I appreciate Dan and all the work he's done. It's the first time he's been down here with us. It's actually the first time we've met in person.
Yeah, I know.
So
it feels like we're old friends, though.
I know. We've talked on the phone and emails and stuff like that, and so over the last year or so. But anyway, so welcome today. We're glad you're here.
Man, glad to be here, bro.
So, well, good. So we're going to go back to that word we talked about last week. You know, I mentioned last week that several years ago, probably about 5 years ago, I was reading through the book of Ecclesiastes, and I assume I was doing so in the Holman Christian Standard Version because of a specific word they used there, that translation. And at the very beginning of the book of Ecclesiastes, is that for me or for you? Was it for you?
Put it wherever you need it.
It was your footstool, wasn't it?
No.
I'm just putting this together. He brought it over as his footstool. You're good?
I have another.
All right. He said I have another one. So, hey, let me turn this off real quick. Oh, it's off. So I was reading through and I came across this this word that Ecclesiastes uses. Solomon uses it over and over. And the word is futile. And I got thinking of that word. I went to some other translations and used it. And in other translations, probably translations we more commonly use, like in the ESV, they use the word vanity. And I think it's a word that we associate with a little bit more. But I think we know vanity from the context probably of something bad. We wouldn't want to be considered vain, and we wouldn't want to consider or project that we're doing vain things. And we know what that is. We know that vanity is essentially a cover-up of what we don't want seen in us. Okay, so it eliminates the exposure in a sense. But when you get to the word futile, we went through the room here last week, or the field, and we talked about that. And some of the words that came out were things like pointless or wasted. And what you have to separate there is it's not necessarily a waste of time. It's something that we have. It's some kind of resource that could be effective or productive that we've wasted. So we haven't used it in the right way or haven't applied it correctly or used it even in the wrong way. And so Solomon walks down through the book of Ecclesiastes, and he keeps coming back to this word that everything is vanity of vanities, or it's all vanity, or it's this absolute futility. And that's very interesting because it comes from a guy that we would look at from the outside saying he got everything he wanted. The guy, anything he wanted, he was able to figure out how to get. It looks like everything he touched, he won at. Anything he set out to accomplish, he won at. And so I have a hard time sometimes looking at that saying, how in the world could you consider your life and your stuff absolute futility or wasted stuff when you got everything you set out for? And so last week we talked about it from the perspective of having lost some things, especially during this time that we're walking through. There's a lot of things in life that we've lost. And the things that were interesting that came out from you guys were more things of relationship and connection. It was going out to dinners or having friends over or that kind of stuff. It wasn't so much that maybe your income changed some or, I don't know, you had to stop gathering something or whatever. It's more the time, the connection, which I think is a great perspective. You guys got a good handle on that. But what I want to talk through today is not so much the gaining, but I want to talk about that interim period that we're in. Dan and I just had this conversation actually. The way that I look at this period, as much loss as there's been and not rejecting the notion that there's a lot of hurt and suffering that's going on. I talked to a neighbor last night for quite a while, and after I walked away, I felt even worse about the conversation because I could sense a brokenness in his face and in his voice that I didn't really know how to acknowledge at that point because we didn't have a deep relationship. It's just been a high kind of deal for the last few years. And so there's work to go back and have that conversation. So I know there's a lot of loss going on right now, but we're not at the point of having the right and the opportunity to go back and gain whatever it is that we want to gain. But we're at a place where we kind of get to set the boundaries or the limitations or even stripping away some of the walls of what we want to move towards in the future. So I want to talk about this in a very important time where we're rearranging to prevent futility in the gain that we're going to deal with next week. All right. So let me get here in the passage here, and we'll walk through a few things. Give me just a second here. So the question I've heard, or the comment that I've heard over and over from most people, is I'm ready to get back to normal. Have you guys said that? I like that. I like to kind of nod back and forth. You guys ready to get back to normal? I think the younger you are, the more ready you are to get back to normal. So what do you want to get back to normal? What do you want to see again? People? It's the same thing. That's what you want for normal? I just want the freedom to do what I want when I want. Opie and I had this conversation last night. I'll be a little revealing here. He goes, dude, what's the issue with the mask? Why can't people just put a mask on? I'm like, it's this thing though that as soon as I put the mask on, I'm surrendering other freedoms, And so I'm going to walk in a store, and he said the same thing. We're going to walk in a store and we're going to wear a mask because it's the responsible right thing to do in this moment, especially when private owners have the right to tell you, don't come in here without it. All right. So that's one aspect of it. If it does something to prevent or to help, that's another aspect of it. But it's this sense that, well, if I give into that, what else is going to be stripped away from me? So there's a lot of competing ideas going on, and I'm thinking here about what was normal though. And from the very beginning, and I think I said this last week, from the very beginning, my idea has never been to get back to normal because I really wasn't loving normal. I really wasn't. Most parts of my life, I didn't like what was normal. And it wasn't because there was some sin factor in there. You could always wean it down to that. There wasn't anything specific that I didn't like about my life, but I didn't like the pace, really. And in fact, probably a week or so before this all happened, I called Mandy. We were talking one day, and I said, things can't keep going like this. I said, not just us. So our world can't keep functioning like this. It's moving too fast. There's too much new being introduced too quickly. And I said, people can't keep up with this. And I said, so you sit over here and you start fighting and fighting and fighting to catch up in this area, and then you neglect this area. So now you have to rearrange to catch up in this area, and you neglect this area. And you're constantly, and you're paying out in some way to try to get to a place that we really don't need to be, or at least at that pace. And I said, what happens every time is when you get to this place of where you're fighting like that, I said, things start to bubble up and they start to overflow. And that's the least of it all. Really, the overflow is the least of it. what really happens is when that pressure builds up, something explodes and something ruins. And about a week before this all happened, I said, man, we can't keep moving at this pace. At least if the rest of the world wants to, they can, but we can't do it. It's going to be a major explosion. And when this all began, as much question as there was, I was looking at this as a time where, man, we can stop for a little while. I don't think we need to move at this aggressive of a pace, and I don't think we have to move at the pace for what we are moving towards. The things that we are going after that was causing that pace, I don't think we have to move towards that. And so in this interim time where we're at right now, I think it's a very important time where you begin to structure and to rearrange and to set some value and to set some goals of what you're going to walk towards and how you're going to do that. And so I want to spend a few minutes walking through Solomon's words here in Ecclesiastes chapter 2. And I want you to see kind of how he got to the end of his life and what he looked back on, and not so much that he negated what he had done, but he had negated the way that he did and the pursuits and all that stuff. So I want to walk through this stuff in a little bit, but you kind of were nodding over here about not going back to normal. And is it pace or is it?
It's the pace. I mean, I've enjoyed the closeness to
Yeah.
being home more. And so to imagine going back to work 8 hours a day, I'm going to lose that.
Right. Well, it's interesting. I was talking to your husband, and I'll share this, and I'm not going to throw you on the bus or anything. So Steve and I were talking the other day over coffee, and he said something else. He said, I've loved being here, but at the same time, I kind of miss my office. And I think that's true for a lot of you. You know, it's not that I wake up every morning and just dying to get out of my house and go to an office, but at the same time, there's a sense of normalcy and accomplishment that I get there also. And so I am ready for, my office is in my basement, I know, but still, I'm ready for some of that sense of normalcy, but I don't want to keep fighting and having to work to recreate something all the time. I want to be able to walk through this life and connect with people and make a difference. And that's some of the stuff that we're going to see come out in Solomon's voice, but what you have to separate here in this writing is not that he's dwelling on the loss of something, nor is he dwelling on the gain of something. He's dwelling on the parameters of his life and what he was able to accomplish with or without all that stuff. And I think that's the important point that we need to get to right now, is to not see so much the loss or the gain, but what are we going to do with whatever we have in whatever condition? Because you got to think for a second. What if this doesn't change for 2 or 3 years? What if this doesn't change for 2 or 3 years? Has God lost control of something? Does God not know what's going on? Is God sitting back and saying, Satan, you got the upper hand on this one, you ruined church gatherings? No way. Look at the church around the world, man. Whenever the church gets compressed in any country, it expands. Because it gets down and it gets serious on what needs to be accomplished. And I think that's the important place that we are in a church. And that's really why I'm walking through these subjects, because I want you to start equating this not only to your own personal life, but to us as a church. What if they never let us get back together in some building down the street? What if they don't? Are we still the church? There's still a way for us to be productive, and I think even more productive in some sense, because it makes you dwell on the most important things. Let's walk through a couple words here. As we walk through Solomon's passage here this morning, there's a couple ideas that he's going to build into that I want to hone in on. So I want to point those out to you as we walk through these. First off, he kind of gives this guideline that every pleasure in our life has to have some level of moderation to it. We always use this line with our kids, and we've used it with friends like that. What you do in moderation, your kids will do in excess. What you do in moderation in your home, your kids will do in excess. And it's not always bad, but it can be bad. It can be very bad. So watch the things that you're doing and saying, because your kids will take that one step further. They'll have a little less probably biblical value in that area, and they'll take it to an extreme. So you got to watch whatever you're doing. So Solomon gives this guideline. There has to be moderation built around the pleasure in your life. Verses 1 and 2. He said in my heart, now remember, this guy has everything, including 1,000 women. This guy has everything that he thought he could ever want. He says, I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself. But behold, this also was vanity. I said of laughter, it's mad, and of pleasure, what use is it? So Solomon equates his pleasure, and what he's really going to equate it to, and I don't think we can separate these. I want to go to verse 3 in a second. What he equates this pleasure to is wine. And I know, man, in my Baptist background, we really wouldn't use that word unless we were chastising it in some way. So it's a little uncomfortable for me, all right, to have to deal with this subject. So just walk with me through this, all right? But but I want you to see this thing, because what he's doing is he's taking it from the perspective where he's gained what he's wanted, and he's gotten some joy out of it. But you get into verse 3, and it says this here. Check this out. I searched with my heart how to cheer my body with wine, my heart still guiding me with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly till I might see what was good for the children of man to do under heaven during the few days of their life. Here's the big deal about Solomon's life. Early on, Solomon was given this kingdom that he was going to use to really make major influence in all the world. World leaders would come to see him and learn from him. And so he asked God for wisdom. He says, give me some of this wisdom and I'll handle it properly. And God says, okay, I'll grant that to you, but then I'll also grant you all the other stuff you want. And so Solomon spent time in wisdom collecting a lot of other stuff. I mean, he built these massive gardens, you can still see remnants of. He built water systems, he planted forests, he had major trade deals with other economies around the world to supply wood and different things and all kinds of precious materials. People gave him stuff constantly. The guy was a winner in every aspect because he used the wisdom of God to guide all the other, the business structures and entertainment structures of his life. But then he gets down to the end of it, and somewhere he could mark down at the end, somewhere along the course of his life, he had turned his attention to using this thing that could be real enjoyment. He had used it as something of meaning in his life. He had made that the important thing. So God had allowed him to get this thing, but then he made that the focus and misused it. And so all of a sudden, at the end of his life, he's looking at it, he goes, you know, quite honestly, it's a lot like wine. And this is where the old Baptist background gets a little questionable here. He used this wine as this thing that was good for the person. The guy pursued wine because he just enjoyed it. It brought some pleasure or peace to his heart. But I mean, how many alcoholics do you know that really find their pleasure now in wine? It's a crutch at that point. It's something that takes their mind away. It alters them. It makes them escape. And he says, so in the midst of wisdom, always retaining this wisdom, as I walked into any area of even pleasure, he said, I walked into this thing of wine, but I had to realize that there had to be a stopping point with this wine, or else it would take control of me. And we've probably all been exposed to an alcoholic and know the power, the destructive power of that thing that could be used for pleasure has now taken over the mind and the heart. So he writes that, though, on the tail end of talking about his own personal pleasure. So anytime we pursue any level of pleasure, and we're setting the boundaries for what will be and what should be after this. So he says, any pursuit of pleasure that you have, it's fine, but you've got to make sure that pleasure is not the thing that's going to overpower your mind and be the thing that you live for and to live out of. All right. So have you ever come across something in your life, and it can be simple, it can be a big deal, whatever you want. Have you ever come across something in your life where you gathered it and you realized all of a sudden this is more than you bargained for? Wasn't worth it. Anything. Wasn't worth it. You don't want to. You don't have to say it.
Baseball card.
We tried to get a car for Antonio.
Yeah.
And it ended up being salvaged from Maryland, and we knew nothing until we knew it, and then when we knew it, it just went downhill, further downhill.
Yeah.
We couldn't ever use it again and get rid of it. It just wait for hands clean and the money
Yeah.
lost on it.
It was like sports car kind of deal, wasn't it? Camaro or something like that.
No, it was a Mercury. It
Oh.
was like an older car.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. I was thinking it was a sports car or something like that. So, yeah. You get into something and then realize that it wasn't what it appears to be, or took control in a different way. What'd you say?
Kid, I collected baseball cards.
Oh yeah. So what happened?
I got a whole lot of useless baseball cards.
You still got them?
Somewhere.
Oh, really? Down in your mom's basement somewhere?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, I got stuff. Jack and I went over to my parents' house yesterday, and my dad. So my girls are down in Pigeon Forge on their old person vacation, and our older girls, and they're with my parents. And my parents my dad kept telling the girls, hey, text Jason and go check our house. We think the power went out. And I was like, do you think the air conditioner's not going to come back on? You know, I didn't really know what his goal was here, because I think the power would come back on. I think he kind of knew that. But so, hey, text him, go tell him to go check the house. And so I was like, all right, I'll go check the house. And then mom's texting back saying, don't worry about the house, leave it alone. And then dad's texting back saying, go check on the house. And mom's saying, don't worry about the house, it's fine. So anyway, I mean, we go back and forth. So finally I was like, I'll just go check on the house. So Jack and I rode over there. It was a good excuse to stop by Roy Rogers over there in Springfield and get lunch. So we get over there and walk through the house. And as soon as we walked in the door, Jack goes, smells like Christmas in here. Every time you walk in Grandma's house, I don't know why, it just smells like Christmas or bacon or something, I don't know. And so we walk in and all these things flash back to you. And so we go through and we check all the showers, the toilets, and the freezers and all like that. Everything was good, of course. And I don't know, but then we walked downstairs and I was like, oh, this was mine, this was ours. And Jack's like, where's all the toy guns? Because there's usually like our old barrel of kid guns, you know, old wooden rifles and like that down there. And we're like, where's all this stuff at, you know? So it's just all these memories flash back. So I get exactly what you're saying. My mom's basement is like this treasure trove of fun. But what I will share for no purpose at all was we opened their cabinet. I'm talking to Mom, you know, I'm here, what else do you want me to do? Water the plants and stuff like that. So I did all that stuff. Jack's digging around the cupboard because that's the best thing to do at Grandma's house. And he finds the bag of the lemon drops, the old school hard lemon drops, you know, Cracker Barrel kind of stuff. And so we stole about half the bag and left. And then, but in her cabinet was a can, I'm not kidding you, this big. I got a picture of it, I'll show you. And it was called, what was it called, man? What was the name of it?
Pork brains.
Pork brains.
Ew.
I'm not kidding you. It was a can of pork brains and like a milk gravy, like I guess like sausage gravy almost that you would pour on your breakfast. It was pork brains. I'm like, why would she have that in her cabinet? And so I looked at, I think, surely it's not real. And I read the ingredients, and it's definitely pork brains. So I don't know. I know she's not going to eat it. So I'm hoping someone bought it as a joke. You know, it's that Jack holds it up. He's like, price tag says 4 for $100. It was 4 for $1. You know, so I guess it's worth a quarter. But so that had nothing to do with anything. But I guess just the odd things you find at your parents' house. So, anyways, so we're talking about things though that were they're kind of things that are good, are fun. We find pleasure in, but they can easily overtake us, and they can actually become a loss for us. So as we're sitting here in this day of building out our parameters for what the future is going to look like, let's keep in mind this stuff that we've pursued as pleasure may be a destructive force in our life. So this is shut down now from the heat. So I guess you guys are shutting down also. So we're going to have to do something else. Does someone have their app opened up? You already have it? I was just not going to open mine. Yeah, let me use your phone. Is it going to shut off on me? All right. So I got to think here for a little bit. So we have this pleasure, it needs moderation. But there's also some limitations that we kind of got to set on some stuff. And I want to go down to Ecclesiastes verse 4, because he talks about the satisfaction that he had and then how he dealt with it later on. He says, I made great works. I built houses and planted vineyards for myself. I made myself gardens and parks and planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made myself pools from which to water, forests of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had slaves who were born in my house. I had also, that's not a condoning of wrong behavior, it's just what he had done. And let me scoot over here a second. He said, I also gathered for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and provinces. I got singers, both men and women, and many concubines, the delight of the sons of man. So I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained in me, and whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was my reward from all my toil. Then he goes on down, so you listen to all this stuff that he had acquired, and see, this stuff is programmed into us. This is the stuff that we're bred for and that we're trained for. Everything we learn is about how we're going to win, how we're going to achieve, how we're going to gather, how we're going to store up more. And there's not a whole lot of accountability as to how we handle that through the course of life. But he says here, he constantly says, I did this stuff still holding on to that wisdom that I asked God for earlier. And then he says, then I considered all that my hands had done and the toil I had expended in doing it. And behold, all was vanity and a striving after wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. There's nothing new even under the sun. All this stuff I do, yeah, pieces of technology come up, but in the end, there's nothing new being accomplished. And he says, so I've worked my entire life without limitation and realized that the limitations cause my problem. The lack of limitations cause my problems. Boundaries are some of the best things in the world for us. Boundaries keep us on the right track. We always use this illustration of guardrails. I use it all the time. Guardrails keep you out of the ditch. They keep you out of the river. They keep you out of the trees. They keep you on the one course that will actually take you to the destination that you want to get to. So Solomon rehearses all the things of his life, and he says, in the end, it was just work. And that's hard when we have to consider that everything in our life is built us towards this idea of gaining, and now all of a sudden are we saying, well, don't work for anything? Well, that's not the whole point there. It's not that you don't work for anything. It's what are you going to do with the things that you're winning along the way? And when I sit here talking to my neighbor last night and began to see the brokenness, I thought, I haven't spent the last 4 years of living in this house building a deep enough relationship with him that I could respond to him in that moment. I had gained a lot of other stuff in the 4 years I've lived there, but I lost that connection with a guy who I thought was a friend. And we're still friends, but there's no depth there. And so now I've got to go back and reconstruct that relationship. So the limitations in your life, the limitations in your life blocking out the people, or the limitations in your life blocking out the pursuit that keeps you from the people. Solomon's whole thing was, I haven't done necessarily anything wrong. None of the stuff that I've necessarily gained are bad, at least in his context. But he says, I haven't used those things to accomplish the right purposes. So in the end of my life, I get down, and all this work that I've given myself to has actually disconnected me from the things that I should have been connected to. That's really the last point of this whole thing, is that there's always a cost. I don't know the exact wording because I don't have notes in front of me. There's always a cost to the things that you apply your heart towards. There's always a cost to that. I mean, have you ever gotten anything that you found like the cost, in the end, I really went for it and the cost wasn't worth it? The cost really wasn't worth it. I mean, I've come across things like that all the time. We had a house over in Woodbridge, man, for years. And we just kept having to funnel money into it and all like that. And in the end, we just had to be done, had to call and say, we're not going to make a profit, let's sell it, don't get rid of it. There's things in your life all the time that you apply your heart to it for a bit, and then you realize it's taking you down this wrong road. And that's where Solomon was at the end of his life. He had applied his heart to so much, he says, and it's not stuff that counted for any value, it's vanity in the end. It's a covering of all the hurt and the pain that existed. All the exposure that I had to offer people, it became a loss to me. But let me scoot over here, give me just a second here to scoot over. I want to share one more verse, but I want to make sure I have it correctly here. So he says here in 18:19, he said, I hated all my toil in which I toiled under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be wise or a fool, yet he will be master of all for which I toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. This also is vanity. And there's a few more verses in there I'm just going to skip. In the end, he says, there's some dude that's going to come after me, and he's going to pick up where I left off. And I have no idea what he's going to do with it. He could take my business that I built for the last 40 years, and he could just sell it. Or he could take the assets out of it, keep those, get rid of everything else. He could kill it. He could destroy it altogether. And what's left of my name? And that's the perspective that Solomon is dealing with, like the parameters of his life on what he's going to set from here forward. I'm stuck in this position where I realize that all this stuff I've gathered I've not used correctly, so what can I do with it from this point on? There's some dude coming behind me that can just destroy it. And I've wasted my life. So you go over into Philippians chapter 3 real quick, and this is what I really want to share with you. Paul gives a better gospel perspective and on how we as individuals should live. We read verse 12 last week. I want to show you verse 13. It says, brothers, I do not consider that I have made it my own, but one thing I do, forgetting what lies behind and straining forward to what lies ahead. Philippians 3 is this whole this race perspective that Paul lays out. And he says, we're in this thing that we're trying to accomplish the work of the kingdom of God. But you know as well as I do, if you'll be honest with yourself for a few minutes here, you know as well as I do that the kingdom of God is not the forethought in most of our minds. It's the afterthought. And so Paul, as good a guy as he was and as much work as he did in bringing people to Jesus, at the end of the day, he says, man, I've not apprehended this thing. I've not taken hold of it. Last week, we looked at the idea of this maturity, buying this maturity. But he says, with that, today, to move forward, I've got to forget a little bit of what lies behind. And right now, sitting in this position, we keep asking ourselves this question of when can I go back to normal? And I think for a lot of us, we have to look at these and we have to look within the boundaries of what we've done. And we have to realize that a lot of stuff in the boundaries of that is stuff that we don't need to go back to. You know, I'll be honest, our time, way too fast-paced. I went to bed the other night, get this, never thought I'd say this, I only got like 6 hours of sleep the other night. Yeah, I only got like 6 hours of sleep, and I got up, and I went and did whatever I had. Oh, I had to take the girls down to Front Royal, and then I met Steve, and I went home and sat down at like 11 o'clock, I was meeting you guys for lunch at 12:30. And I sat down at 11 o'clock and I thought, how in the world am I going to function the rest of this day? I only got 6 hours of sleep last night. For years, I ran off 4 hours of sleep. For years. And I've gotten used to stopping. And I said, how in the world am I going to function on 6 hours of sleep? And I thought for a minute, I'm like, you know what? That's one of the reasons I don't want to go back to normal. I want to stop. I want to slow down. You know, we don't live in debt. You know, we'll have a little car payment here or there, little car payment, but that's the only thing we've ever had debt-wise. But I still feel like I was exhausted financially. Like I commit every penny that comes in the door to something. And it just exhausts me. At the end of the month, I got to figure out how we're going to break even again. I don't want to live like that. I want some leeway in there. I want some extra, you know, just a cushion there. I don't want to be worried about that all the time. You know, we didn't have time to get together with people. We had the opportunity. We didn't take the time because we kept moving too fast. And it's like everything around you says, keep doing that. And you know it's condoned. You know our society condones that, even encourages it. But Paul brings us to this place where he says, in order for you to excel towards maturity, you've got to stop and forget some of what lies behind. He probably talked a whole lot more than what we're talking. Forget what lies behind and start this pressing. We'll talk more about the pressing next week. Forget what lies behind. So I would say, what do you have in your life right now? What are the things that have built up that you look back on now and you think, you know what, because you said it last week, Paul, there's stuff that I really don't need. I really didn't need. So now all of a sudden, do you not just have those things, but have they become a distraction? And what are they distracting you from? Because real quickly we found here that there is time for relationship and there is time to sit around the table and there is time to hang out with a neighbor. But we wouldn't have said that a few months ago. So what's in the behind that we've got to forget about? Those are the things that during this time where you've been forced to stop that I think we should consider. Forgetting what lies behind. Those are the things to consider. And we start building a guideline now. We start putting in place new guardrails. Because unless we're willing to walk in those guardrails, we will never accomplish what really should be accomplished. Not what we want to accomplish, what should be accomplished. I think it's Andy Stanley that defines vision as what should be and what could be. We know what should be, but we've never allowed it to be could be mentality because of so much that lies behind us. So I'm asking you guys today to commit to this idea of forgetting what lies behind. And as we walk forward as individuals, as families, as co-workers, as bosses or employees, as we walk together as a church, as a leadership team, as servant volunteers, whatever your role is, as we walk, let's forget it. Because it may never come back and it doesn't matter. What lies ahead? Let's establish those parameters right now that will allow us to make the could be and should be what actually is. You guys pray with me? Lord God, I pray that you would, I know most of the people here. I know their love for you and their concern, but at the same time, each one of us, if we really stop and consider, we have these things that have built up in our heart that want to take control of our mind. It's like we're that drunk man that saw good and fun and pleasure in something, but we allowed it to take control and we lost wisdom and lost control. And I don't even know if most of us have realized how much control we've lost on what should be and could be. But I think today is a day of restoring that. I think this time frame that we're in as a church and as individuals and families is this time to reconstruct and bring back to life what could be and should be. So God, I pray that each person here today would make it their commitment. And maybe you even need to just pray this to God this morning and just say, God, make me that person that will forget what lies behind. And the craziest thing you got to be ready for, though, is He may cause you to forget what lies behind. You got to be willing to accept that notion. I hope you would today. So God, I pray that we would forget what lies behind and we would begin that pressing. We would shape our lives to walk into that new, to be prepared to take hold of it and to do something much more productive. No longer futile, wasted, but so much productivity on the things that you've set before us. Help us to walk in wisdom. In Jesus' name, amen. Abrupt ending. Glad you guys are here. Next week, 7 p.m. at Little River. You guys know where that's at? Down Braddock here. You can cut through here. It's partially paved now, but down Little River. All right? Saturday night, 7 p.m. Saturday night, 7 p.m. We'll send out some messages and all like that also this week. All right? Good. Have a good week.